Okay. Well, you can start with that if you want to. I mean, you can share your metaphors and analogies because the Buddha used similes, metaphors, and analogy. That in fact, one of the most interesting was, and he says, the mind, O monks, is fast. It is so fast that I don't even have an analogy for it.
Yeah, maybe if he existed now, he would say like, faster than like an electron or something like that. But there weren't electrons known back then. I don't know.
I often equate it to the speed of light
Hmm.
in the sense that think about the moon with
Hmm.
all of the features, the rabbit in the moon or the man in the moon, and all of these sorry about that. Interrupt.
Okay.
So anyway, back to let's actually think about the moon again, because I know that your
Okay.
mind has gone away from there, wandered away easily. So now that we're back to the moon, with all the craters and all of that that you've seen, the full moon, all kinds of moons, now think of the sun. Now, how long did it take you to get from the moon to the sun? It was just a thought moment.
Very quickly.
The speed of light can't do it. I mean, the moon is more than 8 minutes from the sun,
Hmm. Yeah.
right?
So it's
So
a
the
lot
mind
faster than
is
the speed of
much
light.
right. Right. The mind is much faster than the speed of light in that regard. But also, things happen very, very fast that we
Hmm.
often either miss or don't miss. An example would be that the cup falls off the table. Does somebody catch it, or does it drop to the floor? Does somebody even attempt and do a near miss? Because sometimes you see it and there it went, and we
Hmm.
weren't fast at all. And at other times, you've seen people drop things and then catch it before it lands, right? That shows, in fact, that the mind is pretty fast.
Hmm. It depends on how
Because look at
fast.
the kind of right, because we had to compute angles and trajectories and know where things were going to be a split
Hmm.
second
Yeah.
from now. Hmm.
Okay, that makes sense. Um, so I've been sort of meditating in this room I'm in right now, and I'm pretty obsessed with this wood stove behind me. And I've gotten quite
Your mind keeps going
um,
into the stove, is what I hear you say.
is okay. Well, basically, I was gonna share my analogy for the meditation at least, which is
Hmm.
um, since I've gotten better with the stove, you can pretty much keep the stove going 24 hours a day. So if you start from scratch, you got to do the tinder, the kindling, and everything, get the fire going, and then it takes a couple hours before the metal heats up, and then it starts radiating heat out into the room. But if you get the stove going and then you use sort of the airflow valve and slow it down, and you can keep feeding it wood all day, and then you could put it down to its lowest level and it'll keep the coals alive all night. And then in the morning, you could throw wood on it and the fire will come back. And then, so if you balance it just right with the airflow, then the smoke reburns. It doesn't go out the chimney, it reburns, and then you get the maximum amount of heat. And I'm kind of a perfectionist, so I'm always trying to make sure no smoke is coming out of the chimney. I'm getting the maximum amount of heat just in the airflow, putting the wood in at different times. And as I was practicing my meditation, I was kind of realizing that it's a lot like that. So when my practice is continuous, it's sort of like when I'm sitting, it's like when I kind of just put the wood on the stove and the fire is high, and then in between, if I keep the practice going, it's like I still have the airflow. But if my practice is discontinuous, it's sort of like I have to like chop up the kindling, the tinder, and the kindling, and start over again. And first, if I'm really breaking the precepts and indulging the senses. It's like I'm trying to use wet wood to start the fire, and I'm just getting a lot of smoke and smoldering, and it's not going. So that was the first metaphor that kind of came into mind that I thought about sharing with you.
Did you hear me give a metaphor like that before? Because this sounds very familiar.
I'm not sure. I haven't done the deep dive. I've seen some of the videos I've seen a few of them, but I haven't gone into like all 1400 yet, so I'm not sure.
Neither have I. Yes, it wasn't too long ago, within the past several months, but think, in fact, the first thing to say about it is that we have to remember to keep putting the wood in. That's an aspect of sati, is that you've got to have the wood there. Okay, so we start the story off with that the body, the physical body, is very much like the stove itself, and that the fire is like the spark, especially in the sense of having wholesome thoughts through the sparking of the Dhamma. And the wood that we're putting in is our feelings, which is the source of the energy, the motivating. I mean, you have to feel a certain way in order to do a certain thing. Now, there's several different ways to feel in order to vote, right? But it always has the feeling of that something's important out there. But if you have the feeling that, voting's not important, then you're unlikely to vote. Okay, it has to do with the way that we feel, that the feeling, in fact, drives us. This is part of the important things that I learned from psychology. And yet in our society, we don't pay much attention to how we feel. It's all about what we see and what we hear, but not so much of how we feel. And basically, I think that the reason for that is because we feel bad so much of the time. So why pay attention to that? And the answer is that if we felt good, then we might want to pay attention to how good we feel. So with the wood or the power or the energy, you're absolutely right that it gets dirty, it gets wet, and then it's hard to burn. And so having but it will burn if we keep striking the fire, striking the match, keep coming back and practicing it, and everybody comes with their log in a bog. Everybody comes absolutely saturated with the human society that we live in, and that most of that is having to do with rites, rules, and rituals, or supposed tos, and our relationship to those things. And you just mentioned that exactly in the sense of breaking the rules. If you have that mentality, then that is what will make your wood wet or dirty, right? But you created it based upon a set of rules. But if you'd already forgiven yourself, then even though you did what you did, because you're not holding it against you, that means that it didn't stick with the wood when we put it in the stove for our meditation practice. There's a lot of analogies in here, huh? Okay.
Yeah, so. I know. I get a little crazy with the analogies. I could just keep digging and digging and digging.
Okay. So part of what the job is for a good teacher is to help the student keep sparking, keep trying to light the fire. We also do in the sense of making it tender out of those logs of wood. We don't want to try to start with big, heavy, saturated logs of wood, but that's how people are. So we have to do a few things. And one would be to let the wood dry out by getting away from it all. This analogy, the log and the bog, by the way, is in Sutta number 36 from the Buddha.
Okay, I was going to say, this reminds me of a sutta.
Exactly. that you can't start a log on fire if it's saturated with water. So you have to
Mm-hmm.
take it out and get it into seclusion, which is exactly what we practice. Is that the
Mm-hmm.
beginner cannot practice in the swamp. They've got to get their mind out of the swamp into some privacy. This is, in fact, part of the rationale for why do retreats,
And
is to get
actually,
people
when I
out of the world,
mentioned
except
when
that
I
they're going.
mentioned when I mentioned breaking the precepts, I was actually kind of talking in terms of like the Chitta Viveka concept of like mental seclusion. I think of the precepts as a way of like maintaining that sense of mental seclusion, like withdrawal from overindulgence in sensory stimulation. What they talk about now is like dopamine fasting, like avoiding like being on your phone or on television too much, things like that like stimulate too much dopamine in the brain. So my analogy about like using wet wood was like when I'm allowing myself to like overstimulate, essentially, it makes it very difficult to sit and meditate.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah.
All right. So here's another thing then. Instead of shoving logs once a day or twice a day into the fire, another way of doing it is having the logs shredded so that we give it just a little bit of wood, and just a
Mm-hmm.
little bit more wood, and just a little bit more wood. In other words, we keep going after it. We keep adding fuel to the fire over and
Mm-hmm.
over and over again. And that will help it get burnt. Even if the tinder or the kindling that we're using is wet, it'll still go off a whole lot better than a wet log.
Yeah, especially if the coals are hot. I threw I threw a very saturated log in there a little bit ago and a bunch of hot coals, and after 10 minutes it burst into flames anyway.
Well, that's the whole point is that we are new at this game, and our
Mm-hmm.
stove, the fire keeps going back out.
Mm-hmm.
Fire for the meditator, the fire keeps going back out. And so how can we get it going again? And the answer to that is what we've been talking about here, and that is using the analogy of the stove. Now let's go a little bit further. We can say then that the fire itself is consuming the wood. So we've got the body, which is the stove. We've got the feelings, which is the force, the wood, the dirt, all of that stuff piled on, our bad feelings, etc. And now we've got the mind, which is like fire, unbound.
Mm-hmm.
So you know where that reference comes from. So the fire is actually unbound, but it's there contained
Mm-hmm.
within the stove and working with this. But that fire, if you don't contain it, will become unbound and burn your house down, right? And so this is why we want to, in fact, contain the mind. And then the next part is you're talking about using the damper so that you can control the
Mm-hmm.
amount. And one thing about is controlling the amount of smoke and heat, because then that's the Dhammanupassana, or the fourth aspect. So we've got Kaya Nupassana, the body, Vedana Nupassana, the fuel, Sita Nupassana, the fire itself. And now we're looking at what kind of heat and smoke are we putting out?
Mm-hmm.
Because what we're looking for is fire, we're looking for heat, not smoke. And yet, most of us live a pretty smoky life if we can ever
Mm-hmm.
get a fire going. And why? Because the wood itself is dirty and we don't know how to make good fires. So, this is a good analogy for how we
Great
can
analogy.
learn to
Yeah.
practice. Yeah, how we can learn to practice anapanasati.
Yeah, I was
And
picturing
possibly,
the
so don't rain on your own parade. Don't piss on your own fire.
it
And
also
that's
helps me
what we
reflect on
do.
how negligent I can be, because sometimes I know it's about to rain and I know that I took the tarp off my wood pile because it was sunny and I wanted to let it sun basically. And I'm too lazy to go put the tarp back on the wood pile. So I just let the wood get rained on again. And then it makes the job more difficult. And then it's raining and I need a fire. And then I'm like, well, I let the wood get soaked. And I have to like cut it into smaller pieces and work harder to start the fire again. And that's exactly what I'm like with my practice. Like, I know that I shouldn't let it get rained on, but I do. And then, you know.
All right. So here is another analogy that you just mentioned, and that is that when the logs are wet, it
Mm-hmm.
actually we need to take the effort to turn the logs into kindling
Mm-hmm.
so that we can feed it in. It's a whole lot more work. This is the Buddha's understanding of one's right noble effort, is to begin to stop seeing things as great big problems and start looking at it as just this, just this, just this thought, just this moment. And in that regard, we're taking a hand axe and shaving that log down into kindling. But then we have to remember to keep putting that kindling in. This is, in fact,
Mm-hmm.
possibly the way of looking at it is that we take that kindling off instead of working with a log that we've got. We take some kindling off and feed that to the fire, and then we take some more kindling off and feed it to the fire, and take some more kindling off and feed it to the fire. Pretty soon we got quite a blaze going here.
I feel like I keep adding to this metaphor, but now I'm thinking about the fact that my axe gets dull and sometimes I'm too lazy to sharpen it. And I'm just like really struggling with a dull axe to try to make kindling. And it's just like, just sharpen the axe. So there's probably something else in there too.
Yes, in fact, that's exactly right. That we want to make sure that we're sharp, that we're not
Mm-hmm.
dull, because being dull is a hindrance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
And so we can bring in all of the hindrances in here in one at a time, if we please, with this analogy. But the important point, though, is to recognize that the big, heavy problems of life don't burn well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so the better thing to do is to chop it down into tiny little pieces, like how do I feel? What is this thought right now? And then
Mm-hmm.
take the effort to change it right now into something that's worth putting into the mind. This is the Buddha's idea of gladdening the mind, um, having wholesome thoughts. And pretty soon, with that, we wind up with a whole lot better fuel
Okay. I feel
because
like we just
things.
covered. We took like all of Anapanasati and all of like the teachings and shoved them into this analogy of the wood stove.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to hear the other analogy that I thought of the other day?
Oh, all right.
I don't think it'll off track us too much. Well, have you ever seen The Matrix? The movie The
uh,
Matrix?
Let us say that at one point in time, I was sitting in the theater while the movie was on stage.
Well, I think it's the most unintentionally dharmic movie that's ever been created.
Unintentionally,
So
what kind of movie? I missed a
like
word.
just like dharmic, it's I
Oh,
feel like it
Dhamma. Uh
really
huh.
people, yeah, like some people think it's Christian philosophy. I think it's very Buddhist. And anyway, but so just I'll give you the premise in like less than 2 minutes, and then I'll tell you the analogy that I thought of.
Okay.
So the premise of the movie is essentially that in the past that there was a war between machines that were given artificial intelligence and humans, and the machines became sentient, and there was a war between humans and the machines. And since the machines run on solar energy, humans burn the sky to block the sun. And then because the machines didn't have solar energy, they essentially enslaved the human race to use the humans' physical bodies as their energy source. So they were farming humans. And the way that they kept the human crops from dying, was by creating a artificial reality, a computer construct called the Matrix that human beings are plugged into from birth. And so our whole lives, everything I see around me right now is a computer fabrication but in reality, I'm actually in like this pod that, you know, I'm being grown in to feed the machines. So the Matrix is like the reality that we live in. And then the main character, Neo, he's awakened to free human beings from the Matrix. Anyway, so here comes the analogy. I don't want to give you the whole movie, but in the second movie, he meets the architect of the Matrix, the basically the computer program that built the Matrix, that designed the Matrix, which is this mental fabrication, this computer fabrication that we live in, that we think is real, that isn't. So anyway, all that's just to say that while I was meditating the other day, I thought to myself that the architect of this Matrix, well, first I thought the Matrix is not external, it's internal. And I thought the architect of this Matrix is craving. I was thinking of the Buddha's words when he first became awakened. Right. Because, you know, everything we talk about really comes down to some form, you know, craving in some form. You know, if you think of Paticca Samuppada, you know, the first 6 factors up to contact seem to be kind of, you know, if you take away ignorance as a prerequisite, the other factors seem to be sort of like natural processes. But as soon as craving comes into it, craving, you know, manufactures and fabricates this confused relationship to the world. That it fabricates the self, it fabricates the world, it fabricates the contentious relationship between self and the world. You know, all of the storylines that become our algorithms, that guide our behavior, that give us a sense, you know, this illusion of self and free will and all this stuff. So I kind of put all of that in.
Here's the first thing is that many people have come up with that analogy, or at least in Buddhism on it, and that it does have some things, and that we can look at it kind of in 2 ways. One is we can look at it from the reality of an engineer or scientist or physicist, because this was my early training, okay? And the likelihood, by the way, of AI taking over is dependent upon what human being has a hand on the switch, because that's the way to destroy AI, is take away its power, take away its energy source. Now, the number 2 is that no AI is going to use human beings as a source of energy. They're very inefficient. No, they'll find ways of having whatever device that the AI lives in have it covered with solar panels better than what we have now, because the AI designed them. Okay, so the AI can make it hard, but they're real machines. They do have temporary problems, and sometimes they break down, especially when they're shot at. Okay, so the reality is that it's not possible for them to take over. It's not possible for them to take over. Number 2, it's not possible, if they did take over, to abuse humans the way that they do, because most of the AI, not getting into too details on this, but the point is that the premise of the Matrix is impossible. And that we know for sure, because it's a movie that's more than 20 years old now, and no reality in sight other than the jokes about, do you want the red pill or the blue pill? Okay.
But as a metaphor, it's excellent.
It has some features to it. Here's one that you might have missed. And that is that if the machines need the humans, and they need the individual humans to remain alive, then they're pointing at the point of consciousness. They have to create this matrix to give a kind of intellectual input or food to the infant. So the Buddha actually talks about consciousness itself is a nutriment, just like eating hamburgers. It's a nutriment. And a lot of people don't understand that. But here's in the Matrix, we find an example of that. You've got to give consciousness to these humans, or they'll atrophy from boredom.
And also, the architect told Neo that the original Matrix was a perfect world, and the human crops just kept dying off. So he had to create like a world of conflict and war and suffering in order to keep them alive. To keep the humans alive. That's just what the architect said.
That goes along with that, except that he's missing a point, and that is that this whole process that all these humans are going through, one way or the other, they're ignorant of.
Mm-hmm.
Once you become wise or knowledgeable to what's really going on in that regard, that means that you can create your own input, because people already have been doing that. They've been creating the garbage, the negativity, and feeding off of that, because that kept them alive. But now we can find out that we can find wholesome things to eat that will also keep us alive and keep us happy and contented instead of miserable. So it depends upon what food that we eat, in the sense of what do we look at, what do we hear, what do we say about what we hear and see and think, and most importantly, which most people miss, is how do we feel right now? So, in that regard about the Matrix, we can say that there are analogies that are worthwhile, but a lot of the story is just a movie. It's just a movie. And at the end of the movie, is from what I understand, if I've got it correctly, he's out there dodging bullets.
Well, yeah, because he's realized he's in a computer program, and so he doesn't have to go by the rules. He can like literally reprogram everything around him.
Now we're getting into real Dhamma.
Yeah. Well,
that's the real Dhamma, is that in fact we can dodge the bullets, the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. If we're fast enough to see them coming, we can dodge. Except we don't have to dodge them with the body. We can dodge them mentally. Oh, you're a terrible teacher. I wonder who he's talking about.
It becomes a little bit hopeless in the second movie, actually, because the architect also reveals to Neo that like even Neo as an anomaly in the Matrix is like part of the program itself. And the prophecy of him liberating the human race is also part of the program, and it's a cyclical thing that's happened over and over and over. So it actually has quite a fatalistic kind of ending if you watch all three movies. But yeah, when in the first one when he can see the code and he's dodging the bullets and he's bending the rules and he can fly and all that, I think that like that fits in with the idea of awakening.
Yes, that's the whole idea of the red and the blue pill, is the idea of awakening that we can put into the analogy, not necessarily of Buddhism, but in the way that people live. Are you going to live in the lies that you were told? Or are you going to take the pill and start looking at what's really going on instead? Okay, because the Matrix itself is just a pack of lies. It's an illusion. But here's how we create that over and over again, is because we have recorded all of the past lies that we were told since childhood, and we keep repeating them over and over and over again as if they were real. In fact, this is why the Buddha talks about it as in the sense of rites, rules, and rituals, which we could also talk about laws, societies, norms, ways to do things. And much of it was never written down, or it didn't need to be. It was transmitted from mother to child. An example of that is the child is a little kid, and the bill collector comes to the door, and mom says to the kid, "Go to the door and tell him that mommy's not home." All right. Within a week, this kid's going to be lying to his mother nonstop because she gave him permission to lie. Okay. And so there's where it comes from right there. That's a clear example of that the society itself helps each child to create their own matrix. And that what the Buddha is teaching is that, yes, that's so, and we have two things to do about it. The first thing it is, we're going to start changing and modifying that matrix and putting it to work for us correctly. And then the more important thing is that we're also going to continuously remember that either that this is a matrix or that I'm not in the matrix, that I'm in reality now. And this is actually part of the practice of Paticca Samuppada, that when we come out of perception, then we can go directly to consciousness, which is the thing that's real, that we start living in the bodily sensations, the emotional sensations of right now, the eyes, the doors, and we live in reality. The thoughts that we have are about what's happening right now. And that's what's real. And everything else, the past, the future, all of that's part of the matrix, part of the lies that we tell ourselves.
Could I ask a question that might complicate things a little bit?
Okay.
Okay, so let's see. I feel like there's like 3 parts to articulate this. First is like the experience. So when I do get into like a very like awake, aware, but very deep state of meditation, there's an experience that I describe as like, it kind of feels like taking off a helmet in a way, and that there's a sense of like
maybe the whole spacesuit.
Yeah, like it's a sense that like the senses, the brain activity, and the body all kind of go with that helmet, and the personality, Michael, the whole Michael personality, all of the memories and narratives that are sort of the software that guide my normal way of being. It kind of feels like all of a sudden those are in front of me, and then there's with looking at it, it's hard to describe without, because there's not an I in that, but it's an awareness. It's like a very clean, cool, almost musical awareness that can see that.
Would you call that your personality? That suit that you're talking about, the helmet and the suit and all?
That's coming off. It's the personality, but it's also contained. It appears from that subjective point of view, to be contained and constructed within the body, the brain, the nervous system, and all that stuff. At least that's how it appears from a subjective position.
Okay. So then we could go to the point that then you realize now that you are not your personality, that can be taken off and hung up.
Yeah, when I had that experience, that became very clear. But well, I can get, there's definitely, what's interesting is that I can see that, but there's still a conceit behind it that I can't uproot. But I think of Ajahn Chah, he said,
there is no real reason to uproot that. It's much better to just recognize it. But see, you've brought the matrix into that now because you've got the rule, thou shalt not have that sense of self, even when the personality becomes loose. And the answer is that, yes, I do agree that there is that instinctual thing. In fact, we can call that the self-preservation instinct. It's an instinctual thing.
Here's where
know it
where
well,
I say that,
but don't hate it.
This is what I mean. Where it like I don't want to make the conversation too theoretical, but so there's the Buddha said that monks, there is the unconditioned. If there wasn't the unconditioned, then liberation wouldn't be possible. And then I think of Ajahn Chah when he describes samadhi. He says it's sort of like oil and water. Like awareness is sort of like the oil, it separates out from the water, and then all of the 5 aggregates, everything that kind of falls into the category of the 5 aggregates, the constituents of our perception, is like the water. So they kind of separate, and that's a good analogy for that experience I just described. So I guess what I'm asking, and like I said, this might be too theoretical a question, is, and then, okay, so there's one more piece. Ajahn Dunn. Ajahn Dunn, he's a teacher in the Thai forest tradition. He got to the end of one of his talks once, and he made a statement about the consciousness that doesn't depend on consciousness as its cause. So I guess what I'm asking you in your experience is, we can see that consciousness, as the Buddha said, is designated as like fire as a condition of that which it depends on. So like a stick fire, the fire that depends on the sticks is a stick fire. So eye consciousness is dependent on the eye, your consciousness depend on the ear. But this experience I'm describing, and some of the words of Ajahn Dunn, Ajahn Chah, and then the whole thing about the unconditioned, leads me to believe that there may be an awareness that doesn't depend on the senses.
What is the conditioning agent, or what is the process of conditioning? Let's get away with that word right now. What do you mean when you say unconditioned? In the sense of what is it now, and then there's a conditioning process, and now you have a result of that conditioning, right? This is in fact step 3, 4, and 5 of Paticca and the conditioning is called perception or Namarupa. Why? Because the rupa is real. That's what comes into consciousness. But we have to make something out of it. We have to do something to it. We have to name it. We have to understand it. And that's the conditioning agent, perception. And then the conditioned item is the world, the matrix that we live in, as opposed to the real world, which came in through the senses of consciousness. This is deep Paticca right here, but you brought the word up, conditioning and unconditioned. So this is what is the conditioning agent. So when we only just see what is there, in other words, in the I think it's the Bhaddati Sutta, in the Udana, there is a story about that the seen is merely the seen, the heard is merely the heard, and the cognized is merely the cognized. In the sense is that it's remaining unconditioned by perception. What the seen is merely the seen. It is not concocted into an understanding of something that will then lead to feelings. So the problem with Bhaddati is that he was practicing this while he was out walking, perhaps going back to where he lived, and he was killed by a cow. Why? Because he just saw the object of the cow without putting the perception, oh, this is a cow with a cap and she's dangerous and I should be afraid and avoid her. He didn't do any of that. So this state that we're talking about of being unconditioned can be a dangerous state. This is why those who are practicing this need to be in an actual physical safe location. But the guy didn't get that from the Buddha because he was too much in a hurry, as you know. Oh, no, you don't. But anyway, it's in the sutta.
the way I kind of interpreted that sutta was that because the Buddha's always talking about the conditioned, and he's always he wants us to basically stop grasping at it, stop fabricating, stop conditioning what's conditioned already, basically.
Trying to stop making sense out of it, which means that by making sense out of it, we own it. We want to take it. We want to steal reality and make it mine. That's why we do the concocting, is so that we can understand it. It's part of our knowledge now, rather than just out there.
So he was telling Bahia basically to like allow seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, and smelling to just be that, and not to fabricate all the rest around it. So for me, like, I don't know, maybe it was Ajahn Amaro who described Nibbana as the reality of, or I think it's Ajahn Sumedho. He describes Nibbana as realizing, or actually I think he took it from Ajahn Chah, so I think it just goes back to Ajahn Chah again, but realizing the reality of non-grasping.
But there goes. Okay, so he got the beginning of it right there. Because the reality of the grasping will lead to no longer grasping, even down to the thought level. And now we've got nothing to grasp at, and there's no grasping going on. And so things really get cool, relaxed, easygoing. And that's Nibbana. Nibbana is not the no longer grasping, it's the resulting peace and quiet and happiness that results from stopping the grasping and clinging. But the things that we're grasping and clinging after are what makes us feel. And what made us feel is this thing in the Pali is Salayatana, or the internal
Mhm.
representation, or the thing that once we've concocted it or once we've imagined it, that's what contacts us. So if we stop imagining what things are, we stop looking at it for an understanding and just let things be, then there is no more perception, which means there's no more feelings, which means there's no more grasping, which means now we can be pretty peaceful. We can be pretty quiet. Everything is really easy. Things cool off. And that's nirvana, is when we're peaceful. So we could actually talk about it in the sense that the whole process is coming to rest. The agitated mind, one full of hindrances, not at rest at all, is quite active. And so the whole process of anapanasati is stop doing the active things and be satisfied with the way things are down to the point that there's nothing going on. Isn't that marvelous? So now I can take a rest. But I'm not going to go to sleep. I'm going to stay awake and watch
And it
what's going
seems
on.
one of the sort of understandings that I had, and Buddhadasa always talked about as the desire or following desire. So I think of the self as the shadow of desire. It's sort of an epiphenomena of desire, sort of like how a shadow can exist without an object and sunlight, right? Like as soon as the sun rises and there's an object, the shadow appears simultaneously. Um,
Okay, we
so
can
the
use
arising,
that. But in fact,
so
the Buddha uses such an analogy with a tree and the shadow of the tree. You see, the tree can just stand there, whether it's got leaves or not and blowing or not, the tree is just standing there. But over the day, the shadow is moving. And we get caught up into the matrix of the shadow of the tree rather than looking at the reality of the tree. So there's your analogy right there. Shadows. Yes. Okay. No problem with that.
well, what I was getting at is since the self is the shadow of desire, desire creates the sense of self, and then it's stored as tension in the body. And since we humans, myself included, enjoy that sense of self, we don't like the way the cessation of desire feels, because when desire ceases, the sense of self ceases along with it, because it's dependent upon desire to exist. Um, and so we have to kind of train ourselves to be like you're constantly reminding students to be satisfied in a desireless state, even though there's a sense of, it's different because we're not used to that sense of self kind of softening when desire softens.
Okay.
Um,
So there's two things that we can be saying about this. That in the sequence of Paticca Samuppada, a lot of people have the cause effect, and you have to take the step 9 before you take step 10, and then step 11, then step 12, where in fact the reality is that some of that stuff is intermixed and happening along together. And so here's how that comes. When grasping actually starts and occurs, in fact, this is the tanha, and this is
mhm,
the upadana, and the self is the arm that did the grasping. Okay, so we invent a grasp or in order to do the grasping. But the
mhm.
reality is that, as the Visuddhimagga points out, there is walking, but there is no walker. All right. So But the walking exists, and we think I am the walking. That's part of the matrix. The reality
Hmm.
is that there just is walking. So here's one of the things that happens with a lot of students in Anapanasati is they begin to, instead of being the thought, I am this thought, we begin to observe with a different part of the mind the thought, in the sense of now there is the thought and there's the observation of the thought. And so we immediately, I am not the thought, I'm the observer. But another way of looking at it is that there is observation that is
Hmm.
occurring with no need to have an observer. But
Hmm.
there is still the observation. Okay.
Yeah,
And so
it's
that's
interesting.
that's at that deeper level that we were talking about. The sense of self is actually a sense of the observing, but no need for an observer.
It's interesting because it's easy for us to understand that objectively when we look out at the world, that there can be activity without an actor. But when we look at our own internal processes, it's really hard for us to accept that, you know.
Okay. All right. So let's not get so philosophical and let's get really practical, because that's what this teaching really is all about anyhow. And in this case is what we can do is we can change the vocabulary from the word self into the word selfish, because this is really what's going on is that from time to time we get selfish, like for instance when one is afraid. When there is fear, there is someone or something to be afraid. And so there, the creation of the self exists, and in the process, it's fear that gives rise to a me. I am afraid. This is
Mhm.
actually the self-preservation instinct, which is, mostly featured in all behavior. So here's an example. Brother comes up and says, "Please loan me $500." And we think a second, and what are we thinking? Do I have $500? Do I want to lose my $500 to give it to this jerk because I probably will never see it again? Okay. And so selfishly, we will say no. And then everybody's unhappy. But if I'm looking for altruistic, oh, it's not me, it's not my money. And my friendship with him is far more important than my money. And so we start looking at things relative and say, sure, here's $500, and now we both are happy. And never mind about whether I ever get the money back. That's off into the future. Who cares about what happens in the future? Right now, we have created mutual friendship because I chose in this point to not be selfish, to not think about, talk about a zero sum game. So a win-win or a non-zero sum game is what the Dhamma is all about, and society is all about a zero sum game. If I give him something, I lose something. There's where the self comes in. But when we're in a win-win situation, there's no selfishness. That we can be altruistic is another word for it. Are we going to be selfish or are we going to be altruistic? Now the joke is that the Republican Party is downright selfish. Everything they say is about whoever gets what. So the rednecks they get to hate, and the big money gets their way, and the politicians lie and get a lot of money, and so everybody is in a circle of deceit, lies, etc., like that, and there is no uh, camaraderie. There
Mhm.
is no affection or any of that. So you look at the Democratic Party and you find that they're, oh, well, let's help people. Let's do this with insurance. Let's do this with Medicaid and Medicare, and let's help these people get some housing and all of that kind of stuff, which is very altruistic, but it's still put together and done in a selfish way. And so we don't want to help the Republicans. We only want to help the poor people. And so our altruistic is choiceful in the sense of being selfish in one respect and not selfish in another respect. So that's an example then. So the Democratic Party is only half screwed up.
I don't know. I can't tell anymore, to be honest. I can't tell who's more screwed up anymore when it comes to politics. I used to be sort of one-sided.
You still want it. When you don't want anything from it, then you can see it more clearly. So when you're selfish,
I've kind of pulled myself out of that equation.
Mm-hmm. And so not giving a flying rip about which way is going one or the other, and now we have the quality of, are we going to pay attention or not? And in this regard, I'm talking about paying attention to what's happening in politics, but I still don't give a flying rip about what happens. I'm just here to enjoy the show.
So
without having to guess who done it.
I've been applying sort of the, trying to kind of piece together all of your sort of metaphors, because you speak very metaphorically, and I like to categorize things. So, you talk about, using one wholesome thought after another. And so I started thinking about that, and I started thinking, okay.
That's a phrase out of Sutra number 19, by the way. One wholesome thought after another.
And then, last time we talked, you used the analogy of like, I want to get on the roof, I don't want to climb the ladder. Because I've at least seen what's on the roof, and I just don't want to climb the ladder. I want to jump back up there. But so I've determined that, wholesome thoughts.
That's the same thing as I want. That's the same thing as I want this wet log to burn without chopping it up into little pieces. Okay, so I'm sort
of building up a platform I'm building up like a context for a question about a meditation practice. But
okay.
So I've gotten the sense that wholesome thoughts, in the way that you talk about it, are thoughts of satisfaction. Everything's fine. I feel great right now. Totally fine. The porridge is just right, and unwholesome thoughts are thoughts of dissatisfaction. Like, I want to get on the roof, or I want to get jhana. I want my meditation to be better, which is making me feel like this question's about to fall into the category of unwholesome thoughts. But, so what I was going to say is that that's been working for me really well throughout the day, is reminding myself, just, be happy now, be satisfied. It's not complicated. Just be happy, be satisfied. And okay. And then there's a sense of relief and relaxation, and that's totally enough.
Right. So guess what then? Not just over time, but from time to time, the relaxation gets deeper. That the whole teaching of the Buddha can be said in several different ways. One is that the teaching of the Buddha, there's nothing to it but a morality teaching. It's morality 100% of the time. Ethics, that's all there is to it. Because when you get your mind cleaned out, your behavior is excellent. But we can also say, oh no, the entire teachings of the Buddha is designed around getting the mind satisfied. Because if we can be satisfied, then we're already at that level where we don't harm anybody. The only time that people are going to harm each other, steal from each other, lie to each other, any of that kind of stuff, is because one or the other of them, or both mostly, are dissatisfied.
And so to connect that sort of moment-to-moment satisfaction to the sitting practice, and going further with it, because I've only really recently restarted the practice, so maybe this is the reason. But I'm still sitting, and then the mind will wander. So,
but
how do you go about?
That's a wandering mind is not a relaxed, happy mind. It's on its way to someplace. You've heard the analogy of the monkey mind, where the monkey is jumping from tree limb to tree limb to tree limb. Why does the monkey leave where he is now? When he goes to jump someplace else and he gets there, why does he leave that place if he jumped to go there? The reason that he's not staying there is because he's not satisfied with it. In fact, more than likely, it's not good enough. It's dangerous still. He's still looking
Mm-hmm.
for a place, and he jumps from limb to limb and never finds any satisfaction. So that brings me back to the third item of the entire teaching of the Buddha can be summed up in one word: relax. But coming out of the hindrances is a way of relaxing. Jumping the monkey mind, etc., like that, is not very relaxing. And then we can start paying attention to our feelings, and that gets us even more relaxed. And then we can go like there's the alpha and beta and theta waves in the mind, and hypnosis and auto suggestions and all of that kind of stuff is merely designed in the way of getting us more relaxed and more relaxed. And when we get down to where we're really relaxed, that means we're really stable. Okay, so this is what the word samatha means, is that it's stable, or it's strong, or it stays. And now imagine that it's like a camera on a tripod. What are the three legs of the tripod? Is the body, the feelings, the mind, so that we get everything really stable, and now we can really see what's going on. Just like a good camera needs to be stable. It's really hard to take good video from a car window.
So when I come to sit down to do the practice to do anapanasati, I just continue at how would you sit down to do the practice? Like, you know,
Do I have to sit down?
well, I mean, I still depend on 3 sittings a day to really keep the fire going.
Well, the
So
Buddha talks about doing it right now, not about scheduled events. Scheduling events is the Western mentality of formal practice with a formal starting point and a formal ending point. And the teaching of the Buddha is wake up, do it
mhm.
right now, every time you remember. And that every time you remember is then always screwed into the matrix of the word always. You got to always do this. No, you only have to do it when you remember to do it. You can't do it always, but you can do it when you remember to do it. Okay. And you don't need to sit. What you need is in seclusion. You can lay down, you can walk, you can just sit in front of the computer screen and just close your eyes and say, wow, I do feel good, don't I? This is good enough. Give yourself a moment of pleasure. Take your mind off of whatever that's going on, and that will take the mind into a state of relaxation. And if you stay there a little longer, it'll get a little more relaxed until you can get the alpha waves of whatever waves down to about 4 cycles a second. That's pretty slow. Normally, the mind is just all over the place. It's like 30, 40, 50 cycles a second. Getting down to the alpha is like 7 to 14, but we can get it down to 4 just by sitting and relaxing. And you don't have to do that with a timer or incense or candles or cushions or meditation halls or any of that kind of stuff. But doing it alone, secluded from other people, is the recommendation.
Okay. I mean, the way I see the sitting practice for me at least is sort of like detox or rehab for a drug addict. Like the world is something that the mind is addicted to, and um, an addict doesn't necessarily know that there's a problem until you take away their drug. So the mind that's used to being stimulated all the time, when you sit down and look at the breath, which is not stimulating, all of a sudden you have withdrawals. That's all that anxiety, all that restlessness, all that wandering. So then you see,
That's
wow,
an
okay,
interesting way of putting it. Yes, that's true, I would say. And
because
when
well, I got this
that's
this
actually the
is
biggest problem that people have with a meditation retreat. They go into the retreat saying, hot dog, I'm going to get a lot of this stuff out of the meditation. And the first day they take his books, they take his cell phone, they take his laptop, they take his
mhm.
pen and pencil away. And now we go into withdrawal. And we don't
Yeah.
even know that. I mean, we were addicted to that cell phone. We're going through a state of withdrawal.
When I came out of Swan Mok, is the first thing I wrote down was this analogy. I feel like, and I was an addict because before I went to Swan Mok, I was angry all the time and I was restless all the time. And when I went to Swan Mok, I sat and I went into withdrawal. Like I was sort of addicted to talking, addicted to thinking. Well, I'm still addicted to talking and thinking, but I was also addicted to like watching arguments between people online, like debates and things like that. So when I sat there, it was like 6 days of agonizing withdrawal. And then finally it all just kind of burst and fell away. And I kind of told you about that. But so for me, like
Well,
now
you
having
could
gone
have
back
chased
into
that
the
stuff
world
out
and
right.
relapsed.
You could have chased that stuff out right from the very beginning with the instruction is, okay, so you're going with withdrawal. I can handle that. No big problem. No big deal. I didn't know that I was that addicted to the Reddit, but never mind. I'm good now. Okay, so and maybe after a few days you begin to practice correctly. But the first day or so is, oh, poor me. Oh, poor me. This is tough. This is hard. And that's all just the attitude that we came with. So you could, in fact, say that part of the matrix is the attitude that we have because
Mm-hmm.
we see the world through our own filter, our attitude. And that this is, in fact, what's part of the practice is that after we begin to take the right effort to clean up the mind, we begin to get good at cleaning up the mind. And then we begin to change our attitude to, oh, I can't do this. I can't clean up the mind. Wow, I can actually do it. And that's when the piti sets in. That's the achievement or the success from being able to become satisfied. Satisfaction has brings in a new quality of success. We've got it.
And that's the point where you actually feel like you are making choices rather than just being dragged around by your
Mm-hmm.
addictions.
Because you know that you've always had choices, that you
Mm-hmm.
let yourself be dragged around by the addictions, where you were in charge all the time. Here you are being dragged all around the yard on that cell phone. But who's got a hold of the cell phone? Let the cell phone go around the yard. I don't care. All I have to do is let go.
I like the oh, I was thinking Ton Mehdi. I don't know. Do you know Ton Mehdi? Or he's probably like an Ajahn now. He was at Swan Mok when Dhammavidu was there. He was a
Yes,
Thai
I
monk.
know him. Yes, I have had conversations with Ajahn Mehdi.
He gave 2 talks. Dhammavidu was busy that day. I don't remember what was going on with him. He was he had something going on with him. But in one of them, I didn't understand Patitas. I had never really heard all of the teachings at this point, but he was pointing at the illustration of dependent origination. That Tibetan illustration that Buddhadasa has, and he was
It's a
talking
Tonka.
about yeah, and Tom Eddy his English wasn't great, but the one thing that I took away is that he was pointing out that in each sensory realm that there was a Buddha going like this, and he was basically saying stop to the beings. He just kept saying stop to the beings in the realm, and that was like my takeaway from that. That like, okay, I didn't understand Petit, but I had already had the insight about like the narrative construction of my reality. And I was like, okay, he's saying stop. He just keeps saying stop. And that was the one thing that, in what I could understand that he was saying is just to stop, basically.
Stop.
And yeah.
That's
And
really there's several suttas, but the one that's the most profound is in the Angulimala Sutta, number 86 in the Majjhima Nikaya, where Angulimala finally says, "Stop, monk," and the Buddha says, "I have stopped, Angulimala. You stop too." Okay, so that idea of stopping, but we can see that with the Paticca Samuppada. That's why we practice it backwards, is because it's a sequence of events. When can we wake up? And then the effort that we take is to stop it.
mm-hmm.
When we wake up and see what's going on, we could put a stop to that. Like unwholesome thoughts, we put a stop to it. Now, we can't put a stop to it in the sense that we stop the mind completely. We don't have those skills. But what I can do is stop the unwholesome thoughts by substituting them with wholesome thoughts. And then later, eventually, when I get feeling so good that it's better to pay attention to how good I feel than to try to talk myself into how good I feel, then I can stop thinking altogether and just experience how good I feel.
Yeah, experience for me, like I think of it as experiencing the cessation side of things is far more, at least when I can. That is stopping the unwholesome and then enjoying the cessation, and then doing that over and over and over, and then that becomes continuous, and then that creates like a sense of a coolness that's continuous. So I remember
So I'm
when
glad to hear that Ajahn Mehti is actually teaching that as part of the retreat at Wat Suan Mokus. Stop.
Yeah, Ajahn
Stop
Mehti
your
really.
addiction.
I think he was a little addicted to the breath, though. If you watch him meditate and walk around, he like really seemed like he was very blissed out all the time, like on specifically in this area. He like was really like in it, you know.
Okay. Let's put this little statement into the mix. There are suttas. One of them, number 131, is actually the English translation is one fortunate attachment. Many things that we can attach to are fortunate. So addicted to the breath, congratulations, Ajahn Mehti.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, that's a good attachment. That's a good one. Okay, we're talking about making wise decisions about what is worth clinging to.
Mm-hmm.
And one fortunate attachment is this present moment. One fortunate attachment is to watch the breath. Another fortunate attachment is wholesome thoughts. These are all good things. Another attachment is his name itself, Ajahn Mehti. So metta, that's one of the things that would be a fortunate attachment.
Yeah. Yeah, I liked him a lot. He had an energy for sure around him that made me feel calm. Yeah. Okay. You know, I think my takeaway here is just going back to like stop trying to find something else, stop trying to ask more questions, stop trying to like find philosophical conclusions, things like that, you know.
And just sit down and be pleased. Sit down and pleasurably just enjoy the moment. Be satisfied.
And then what I was trying to get out earlier, I never really got to it, but I keep trying to figure out if there is an awareness that is apart from conditions. That's what I was trying to ask you earlier, but like I said, that would just become way too theoretical or speculative.
Yeah, who cares? Yeah. Let's enjoy the moment. We don't have to figure that one out.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, Martin. Well, let's go ahead and finish up now. This has been a delightful conversation. I enjoy these kind of talks.
Yeah, me too. I thought, well, I'm not really good at being a student when it comes to Dhamma because, like, one of my biggest hindrances I still have, I would say, is a little bit of conceit about the Dhamma. I spend so much time thinking about it that I really feel like, you know, my understanding of the terms and the things like that, like it's hard to find people that I can talk to that I won't like disagree with, you know. But like, you know, so I don't have basically Dhamma friends in my daily life because I'm too
come join us. We've got Sangha.
Talking to you is enjoyable because talking about Dhamma is enjoyable. That's kind of where I was going with that. But yeah.
Okay. Well, on Skype, we've got two groups. One is the Sangha UK and the other one is the Sangha US. The first email that you got from me has those links. We've got Sangha going and it's going to grow. Come join us and help it grow. Go find some real noble friends. We need to have noble friends. I couldn't do it all by myself. Don't try to do it all by yourself. Come join the crowd. Come be around nobles. Have noble thoughts and noble ideas and express them with each other and congratulate each other for a marvelous practice. This is what Sangha is all about. That's what the Wats are supposed to be about. When people are getting along really well together. Friendship, you've heard. Everything about this whole practice is friendship. Becoming friends with yourself, giving yourself pleasure, giving yourself nourishment, giving yourself warm fuzzies.
Hmm.
And when we get good at that, we can give it to others. But
Yeah,
we
and there's, I mean, what
also
else?
get great enjoyment out of getting it from others while we're still practicing how to find it for ourselves. We can find it from our friends too. That's why the noble sangha is. I mean, that's why the Buddha started the sangha. Here's the here's the point, because I've seen it. Why did Buddha invent the bhikkhu? The answer is that that's an irrelevant question. He did not invent the bhikkhu. The bhikkhus had existed for centuries before that. What he developed instead was the noble sangha. That's
Hmm.
what Buddha come up with. Is the communication and the friendship and the community that among nobles. And that's what's missing primarily. The number one most important thing is missing in Western Buddhism.
And that seems to, for me, to be like one of the greatest blessings that came out of Ajahn Buddhadasa and Ajahn Chah is this focus on establishing and creating sangha.
Hmm.
Um,
I know,
because
I was around them.
yeah, maybe next time we talk, I love hearing from people who like knew Buddhadasa directly, because I'm always curious of what he was like as a human being, like physically, like, I always imagine him being like very like, I don't know, like some like gravity, like strong, like solid.
He was more like Santa Claus, different suit.
Okay, that makes sense.
A right jolly old elf.
Okay, Santa Claus. Okay. Alrighty. Well, thanks for talking to me today.
Okay, Michael, we'll see you later.
Yeah, you enjoy the rest of your day. I love hearing the cicadas in the background. It gives me nostalgia. All right.
Okay, bye bye.
Bye.